Well, it's the end of 2024, which means that we've come to the end of Season 6 of Zilog and Moto. For almost 6 full calendar years, I've been doing reviews of Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD, and 32X games. I even got crazy and tried my hand at reviewing a game on a modern platform, examining a mini console, and exploring the world of scanline converters. And while I enjoyed those videos, I think I've learned enough over the years that I'll probably be leaving those types of videos to other people that are better equipped to look at such things and that can actually afford things like production and editors. However, having said that though, at the end of every year, I do like to do something a little different, and this video is one that I'll continue to do, that being the year-end retrospective. In this video, I like to do a few things, with the main focus being to look back at all of the games that I reviewed in the last year, and then pick out ones of particular significance for awards, and then also put together a few top 10 lists that look back at not just the games that I reviewed in 2024, but since the inception of the channel in 2019. Before we get into all that though, I want to take a second to give thanks, and also discuss the state of the channel. This last year has been the biggest year of Zilog and Moto ever. Maybe not necessarily in the quantity of videos that I've released, but I think in overall quantity has been the best, and the numbers seem to match that. In the history of the channel, and I'm writing this a few days before the end of the year, so these numbers might change a little bit by the time this video goes up, you've watched me dig into the 8 and 16-bit Sega library almost 72,000 times, for a total of about 8,300 hours. To put that in perspective, someone would have to sit at their computer and watch Zilog and Moto videos for a full year to match that amount of time. But that's over the lifetime of the channel. For the last year alone, 33,000 views and 3,600 hours of watch time. That means that over 40% of the traffic for this channel happened in just the last 365 days. So when I said that this was the biggest year in the history of the channel, I wasn't kidding. However, I want to be clear, all those numbers are completely meaningless unless you stop to consider the people that actually drove those numbers. You out there who watched a video, left a comment, maybe dropped a like or subscribed, all of you. The channel being as successful as it is thanks to all of you. So for all 910 of you out there that have subscribed, for everyone that's stopped by the channel and watched even for a minute, I want to say thank you. There's a lot of retro gamer content out there, a lot of it far better than mine, but you chose to give these videos a moment of your time, and for that, I'm really grateful. I know this channel is always going to be small, it's a niche topic of interest in 2024, but seeing those numbers continue to go up and knowing that people are continuing to watch and possibly learning something about these games, it makes all of the work on these reviews worth it. Okay, now that we've gotten the sappy thank you out of the way, let's have some fun, shall we? And what better way to have fun than talk about the bad games that I had the misfortune to review this last year. So without further ado, here are the top 10 worst games reviewed on Zilog and Moto in 2024.
At number 10, it's the only 2-star rated game that had the misfortune to fall into the bottom 10 of the year, and that's Jeopardy! Sports Edition for the Genesis. This actually required a bit of thought because there were 15 games this year that got 2 stars, so I had to debate which was the worst of those 15, and Jeopardy! Got the short end of the stick. It's not a horrible game, but it's also the 3rd time that the game had appeared on the Genesis, and due to that, it gets to go sit in the corner. Then at number 9, it's Goofy's Hysterical History Tour. There's a world in which this is a 2 or even 3-star game because it does do some things well and is an original take on platforming, but unfortunately I had to give it only 1 star due to some difficulty issues with the level layouts. At number 8, it's Lance Boyle and Mega Race. I tried to say that name in all caps. I'm not sure if it carried across. Anyway, Mega Race is another game that is pretty enjoyable in concept, but unfortunately the execution just isn't quite there, especially after having been downgraded to fit on the Sega CD. At number 7, it's MiG-29 Fighter Pilot. Previously on the channel, I'd had pretty good luck with combat flight sims, as both LHX Attack Chopper and F-22 Interceptor were both a lot more fun than I was expecting. But unfortunately, MiG-29 fighter pilot suffers from having enemy combatants that can see you long before you see them, amongst other issues. At number 6, it's the first Master System entry into the bottom 10, and that's Running Battle, a game that seemed to have both been designed and programmed by elementary school children. At number 5, it's Super Space Invaders, also for the Master System. As an original arcade game, I don't hate the update to the Space Invaders formula, but with the Master System version only allowing one bullet on screen at a time without power-ups, it simply falls flat. At number 4, it's Bassmasters Classic, the third fishing game that I reviewed for the Genesis on the channel so far. I had to actually go back and look at the review to remember what I disliked about the game, so clearly it left an impression on me. But as soon as I got a quick refresher, I remembered exactly how frustrating it was. The best thing that I can say about Bassmasters Classic is that somehow it's still not the worst fishing game that I've played on the channel. We'll get to that one in a few minutes. At number 3, it's Great Ice Hockey. None of the great sports titles are known for being very great, but Great Ice Hockey takes things to another level by requiring the Sega Sports Pad to play it, making it a difficult game to even attempt to play in 2024. I suppose I should mention that there is a hacked version of the game that can be played with a control pad, but you're still better off booting up Slapshot. At number 2, it's the first of 2 complete bomb, 0-star rated games that I had the misfortune of playing this year, and that's Back to the Future 3 for the Genesis. You know, it's one thing when a game is bad. It happens, and unfortunately is quite common for licensed properties for some reason. But when the game ships with a bug to where the game is too dark due to using the Genesis Shadow Palette instead of the normal one, something that any tester should have been able to see in 2 seconds of gameplay, that's really bad. And finally, the absolute worst bottom-of-the-barrel game that I reviewed this year on the channel is Power Factory starring CNC Music Factory. Despite the slightly different name, Power Factory is part of the Make My Video series and is every bit as bad as NXS and the Marky Mark versions of the game, with not even a young Phil Lamar being able to salvage the proceedings.
Well, now that we've gotten the 10 worst games of the year out of the way, let's hand out some awards before we get to the 10 best games of the year. And the first one up is the Holy Crap Sega Hated Kids Award, and that goes to a game that I just reviewed on the channel, Phantasy Star 2. I just spent almost 30 minutes talking about this title in the longest review that I've done of a single game so far on the channel, so I don't want to take too much more time to talk about it here, but what the fuck, Sega? Dungeons that had up to 16 levels and almost 100 different connections to map out, and that's assuming that you can even figure out how to get to them. I like the game, but I can only imagine how many kids got this back in 1990 and never even made it to the second planet. Just absolutely brutal. Along the same lines of that award, next up is the simplified version of that award, the WTF Were You Thinking, Sega award, and that goes to Enduro Racer for the Master System. Now, you might be a bit confused about this one because Enduro Racer is actually a pretty fun little game, but the WTF comes from Sega's decision to cut the Japanese version of the game in half to save money and gave American gamers only half of the levels of the original game. Just think, what if Super Mario Bros. Was released in the United States, but Nintendo was like, you know, it's a good game, but we've got to save some money somewhere, so we're only going to give the US Worlds 1 through 4. It's ludicrous to think about, but that's exactly what Sega did with Enduro Racer. Finally, one more award before we start to look at the top 10 games of the year. This is the Why the F is this game expensive award, and that goes to Growl. As of the recording of this video, the last complete copy of this game to sell on eBay went for $275. And unfortunately, that's about what I paid for it earlier this year. I'm pretty certain that you could track down the original arcade board for less money than that. It's a unique take on the beat-em-up game, to be sure, and the Genesis version was the only way to legally play the game at home until Antstream Arcade came around a few years back. But it's also a game that you can easily beat the first time you play it, and the Genesis version is only one player. Those early Genesis third-party titles are just really hard to find in good condition, I guess. But Growl is definitely one that makes you ask the question, are you sure about that? Are you sure? Okay, we'll come back with some more awards in a bit, but for now, here's the top 10 best games that I reviewed in 2024.
Before I go to number 10, I do have two titles that I want to give honorable mentions to. These are games that I feel like deserve some recognition, and they were basically the last two that I cut when making the list. And that's FIFA International Soccer, specifically for the Sega CD, and Phantasy Star 2. FIFA on Sega CD was more than just the cartridge version with enhanced audio, making it the best 16-bit version of the game, and Phantasy Star 2, even with all of its flaws, was still a standout RPG on the Genesis, especially for when it was released. Okay, with the honorable mentions out of the way, we'll start with number 10, and that's a game that I looked at pretty recently in the 32X version of Space Harrier. The 32X might not have had many good games, but this was certainly one of them, with a near-arcade perfect port that was the best way to play the game at home until the Saturn version came out 2 years later. Then, at number 9, it's a game that I had to put in the top 10 due to it coming out of seemingly nowhere and being not just an edutainment title, but a solid platformer in its own right, and that's the Berenstain Bears Camping Adventure. I've got this one higher than the disappointing snooze fest of Yogi Bear, and I think if you play both of them, you'll agree with me. At number 8, it's Battle Core for the Sega CD. Now, I'll be honest, there's some stuff that I don't like about Battle Core. I think it gets much too hard after you get a few levels into the game, but at the same time, it's also a technical marvel and one of the few games on the Sega CD that really displays the true power of the console. At number 7, it's the somewhat underground Batman Revenge of the Joker. Revenge of the Joker was Sunsoft's last chance at getting to use the Batman license, and it's a decent but slightly flawed sequel to their original game. Of note are some very colorful graphics that give the game a more comic book feel than the film-inspired titles. At number 6, it's Sega's Sports Talk Baseball, a game that improves on the already solid Tommy Lasorda Baseball in many ways. It's not a perfect game of baseball and lacks MLB licensing, but it's still nice to be able to play as real players, and the Sports Talk feature was a game changer, being brought over from Joe Montana 2. The technology still had a ways to go, but there's a reason why Sports Talk was in the title of the game. At number 5, it's another sports title, but this time we're looking at the NFL and Tecmo's first entry into the Tecmo Super Bowl series on the Genesis. You can technically be dismissive of the game as being just the NES game with updated rosters and slightly better graphics, but when the original was easily the best football game ever when it was released, you still have to give it some respect. At number 4, it's the first of 4 games this year to be awarded 4 stars, and somewhat surprisingly, 3 of these 4 were for the Master System. The game here in question is Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, which moved the game solidly into action RPG territory, giving players an open world to explore with a very, dare I say, Metroidvania style that somehow seems to be forgotten about in many discussions about the genre, despite releasing all the way back in 1989. At number 3, it's a game that was just recently reviewed on the channel, and that's Wings of War, aka Genog. While the TurboGrafx-16 PC engine is kind of known as the home of shoot-'em-ups, there's plenty of examples of the Genesis being able to hang as well, and developer NCS fully deserves credit for their technical ability and creativity in this one. At number 2, it's the Master System version of Road Rash. Released almost 3 years after the game first appeared on the Genesis, you could complain about how late it was to the party, but sometimes the best things take time, and Gary Priest and Chrysalis took theirs and absolutely nailed this port. It's not a perfect replication of the original, but I'm pretty certain that it's as close as the hardware would allow, and it's damn impressive work. And finally, the best game that I reviewed this year was a total shock to me, as I was expecting a completely different game when I booted it up for the first time. I'm sure that there's some of you out there that might accuse me of favoritism with this one, but Streets of Rage for the Master System grabbed the brass ring this year and then dumped the competition off the service elevator of the 7th level. Regardless of bits, this game has the spirit of the series, and it is a must-own for Master System fans.
Wow, give it up for the Master System this year, people. 3 out of 4 of the best reviewed games of the year? That's pretty impressive, and I didn't even mention Shinobi, which is a lot closer port to the arcade version than you might realize. Now, before we get into the best and worst of 265 episodes of Zilog and Moto, let's give out a few more completely made up and silly awards, which somehow still have more merit than anything that Jeff Keighley came up with this year. First up, the Scott Hall Memorial Bad Guy Award goes to MiG-29 Fighter Pilot. Now, throw out any notions of whether the game was a quality title or not. It wasn't. As someone who grew up in the United States watching MacGyver and the Dream Team, it was profoundly strange playing a game that was centered around jets that would have been shot down by Maverick. Next is the that game is actually kind of good award, which goes to Earth Defense, or the Earth Defend if you go by the title screen. A very unlicensed title from Realtek, not the semiconductor manufacturer, Earth Defense is actually a competent vertical shooter. And while being competent doesn't necessarily mean good, it's worth noting when Realtek's catalog also includes Funny World and Balloon Boy. I am not looking forward to that review. Next up is, didn't you guys release that game already award? And that goes to Hardball 94, a game that is functionally identical to Hardball 3, but instead traded Al Michaels for MLBPA licensing. I suppose players at least got something for that trade, but Hardball 3 was clearly the better effort. If you can show footage of 2 games to someone and they can't tell the difference between the two, and one is supposed to be a sequel, that's a problem. One last award this year, let's see, this will be for the worst Castlevania ripoff, and that goes to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. A video game that didn't need to exist based on a movie that didn't need to exist. I'm really curious as to which house Robert De Niro bought with a salary from this one, although, to be honest, I can't hate on that too much. Make that money, Bobby. Alright, I've wasted enough time. Let's open that PTSD door and look at the worst games that I've had the misfortune of reviewing over the last 6 years. Just in case you're curious, every title in this list failed to earn even a single star in a magical display of programming ineptitude.
At number 10, I'm making an executive decision and grouping all of the Make My Video titles together into one unholy entry. Currently, this only includes Make My Video Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, Make My Video In Excess, and Power Factory starring CNC Music Factory, as I have yet to review Make My Video Criss Cross, but we should probably keep the seat warm for them as well. At number 9, it's Art Alive. If you're not familiar with Art Alive, it's essentially a really terrible version of MS Paint, but with the bonus of not being able to use a mouse or save your work. It's completely pointless and completely shocking that Western Technologies, the wizards behind Sports Talk Technology, had anything to do with it. At number 8, it's Alf. Yes, Alf is that bad. If it wasn't for a certain new entrant on this year's edition of the list, Alf would be the worst entertainment-related licensed game, and Alf would still be the worst if it wasn't for a programming error in that other game. Somehow, Americans got Alf, and not Road Rash or Streets of Rage. I can't imagine why the Master System wasn't more successful here. Number 7 is Pro Quarterback. In the 16-bit era, I have one requirement for an American football title. You have to have 11 players per team. That's the basement, bottom entry level, and Trade West decided, no, we're gonna try to replicate a 5-year-old arcade game instead. Number 6 is the second new entrant for the year, and that's Back to the Future 3, specifically for the Genesis. An overly difficult first level, short overall length, bad controls, you name it, and there's probably a reason not to play this game. But the thing that gets it on this list is shipping with possibly the most visible bug possible. The fact that Back to the Future 3 has a worse game than Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is criminal, but that's the world we live in. Number 5 is TNN Outdoors Bass Tournament 96. This year, Bassmasters Classic gave TNN Outdoors Bass Tournament 96 a run for the title of Worst Fishing Game on the Genesis, but even as bad as that game is, Bass Tournament 96 is still the GOAT when it comes to bad fishing games on the Genesis. But maybe the Pro Edition of Bassmasters Classic will push things to the next level. I'm kind of scared to find out. Number 4 is NBA All-Star Challenge. You ever have a game that just makes you angry at how bad it is? This is one of those games. I refuse to believe that this game was play-tested at all, and it's a complete waste of the NBA license. I'm going to start a conspiracy theory here. This game, being as bad as it is why Michael Jordan refused to have his likeness in later NBA games. You heard it here first. Number 3 is Winter Olympic Games, specifically the Genesis version. Breaking news, I'll be making my triumphant return to the bonus stage at the Midwest Gaming Classic in 2025, and I'll be discussing games that appeared on both the Master System and the Genesis. And this is probably one that's getting mentioned due to the Master System version being the better of the two games. Number 2 is the perennial punching bag and simply one of the worst fighting games to ever exist, and that is Rise of the Robots. When I think of Rise of the Robots, I think of recent videos created with AI that while they're technically impressive, they're also ultimately soulless and lacking any reason for investing your time in it. And finally, the worst of the first 265 episodes of Zilog and Moto, that's still Duke Nukem 3D. I'm planning on doing roughly another 1,000 episodes with the games that are still in the catalog to review, and honestly, I don't know if I'm ever going to find a worse game, which is going to make writing this entry for the next 20 years a challenge. Not unlike your mom's pot roast.
You know, I joke, but some of the games in this last list, I really might have to write about for the next 20 years. I just don't know if I'm going to review games worse than some of these titles. I'm not sure what I did in a past life to deserve this, but it must have been pretty awful. I mean, maybe I was the guy that came up with the idea for RoboCop to appear at Capital Combat. Who knows? Anyway, on a more positive note, now let's take a look at the best 10 games I've looked at so far on Zilog and Moto. Now, if you saw last year's wrap-up video, you'll notice that we say goodbye to Phantasy Star and Cap Attack. Both still fantastic games that absolutely should be in your library, but there were 2 games that I played this year that just could not be denied. This probably goes without saying, but all of these games have earned at least 4 stars, and there's even a sighting of the mythical 5-star rating at the top. So let's get into it.
At number 10, it's the first of 2 new entries for this year, and it's Road Rash for the Master System. This spot was occupied by another Master System title last year in Phantasy Star, and I think it's fitting that another 8-bit game goes here now, because this list isn't supposed to be just the best of the Genesis library, it's the best of all 4 consoles that I cover on this channel. At number 9, it's a game that I feel better about including on the list now that it's had a physical release, and that's Darius. I'm sure that there's some purists out there that don't like that I'm including games released after 1998, since programmers now have access to tools and resources that weren't available back then. But I look at it more like that this work should be still celebrated, because at some point these efforts simply won't exist anymore. At number 8, the original Sports Talk game is still hanging on in Joe Montana 2 Sports Talk Football. This game, while not perfect, was simply more advanced than any other football game at the time, and I'm sure there'll be some comparisons to it next week with the game that opens the schedule for Season 7. At number 7, it's NHLPA Hockey 93. Right now, I'm still maintaining separate entries for NHLPA Hockey 93 and NHL 94, but that decision will get a lot trickier in 2 years when I have to take the Sega CD version of NHL 94 into consideration as well. For the moment, though, it's not the only series that has 2 entries in the top 10, so I don't feel too guilty about it. At number 6, it's Streets of Rage for the Master System. I honestly can't say enough about how magical a port this is, with Ancient really squeezing everything they could out of the console. The soundtrack sounding as close to the Genesis version as it does on a PSG-based chip is nothing short of a miracle. Number 5 is a game that older fans may not be familiar with, and that's Xenocrisis. This is another one that I could see people crying foul about, as it was released in 2019 by Bitmap Europe. But that late release shouldn't negate the fact that it's an amazing effort. I just wish the Genesis had a twin-stick capable controller to use with it. Number 4 is NHL 94 for the Genesis. I don't think I'll get a whole lot of arguments about keeping this one in the top 5, for now. Electronic Arts could easily just release new versions of this game every year with updated rosters, and I guarantee people would buy it. If it works for Tecmo Bowl, it could work here, and EA at least still has the licenses. Number 3 is the original version of Streets of Rage on the Genesis. It's not the best Streets of Rage game, so at some point it'll move out of this spot, but for now it's definitely still solidly in the top 3 of games that I've reviewed so far, and one that I can go back and play at any time and still have fun. Number 2 is the game that truly put Sega on the map. All due respect to Altered Beast. Actually, wait, no, that game is incredibly mediocre. All due respect to Altered Beast's artwork. Sonic the Hedgehog was the pack-in game that moved Genesis consoles and made Nintendo sit up and realize that they had a fight on their hands. And finally, the best game that I reviewed so far on Zilog and Moto in 265 episodes is probably no surprise to fans of the channel, but in case you missed this review, it's still the only game to get 5 stars out of me, and that's Sonic 2. A game that showed that it's possible to take an already legendary title and still tweak things that needed to be tweaked to make something even better. Sometimes it's better when developers leave well enough alone, but the changes to Sonic 2 really made it a better game.
Okay, and that is it for this week's video and year 6 of Zilog and Moto. It's been a fantastic run so far, and I'm very much looking forward to doing it again in 2025. Hopefully at some point next year, the channel will cross that mythical 1,000 subscriber threshold, and I can start getting those big royalty checks from YouTube. I actually might be able to afford a cup of coffee at the end of the year. From McDonald's anyway. I'm not expecting that Starbucks money. Regardless of what the numbers are, if they go up, if they stay the same, if they go down, I'm still really enjoying doing these videos, playing the games, interacting with viewers. It's all exciting, and from a technical perspective, it's something that I feel like I'm continuing to get a little bit better at, even if it's at a glacial pace. Again, thank you to everyone that's ever watched a video, clicked a like or subscribed, or possibly shared the video with someone that might not hear about it otherwise. It's all very much appreciated. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's back to the reviews, and for episode 266, it's a series that is making its second appearance on the channel right in time for the NFL playoffs to start up. This game was actually my introduction to the series back in 1992, and for a while it was by far my favorite football game, even though back then I knew it wasn't perfect. I'll be curious to play it this week and see how it holds up, and I'll just have to decide if I'm using New York or Buffalo, but not the Giants or Bills of course, because the game doesn't have silly things like NFL licensing. Who needs that, right? Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto's year in review for year 6. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later!